Good afternoon, buenas tardes, welcome to all. My name is Lee Ullman, and I'm the Senior Director of the MIT Sloan Latin America office. This office is based in Santiago de Chile and is part of MIT Sloan Global Program. Today, I'm here with a great group of venture capitalists, entrepreneurs, and people at MIT who are interested in entrepreneurship and helping you as entrepreneurs and investors with some thoughts, ideas on what's going on around the world today. Before we begin, I wanted to thank the MIT Regional Entrepreneurship Acceleration Program, the MIT Legatum Center, MSW Capital, Bloomer Tech, Angel Investors, and Endeavor Catalysts. So just to give you a little bit of a sense of what we're going to do today, first is, as people have already seen, there is the chat. So if you have any questions, we would prefer you use the Q&A, which I already see we have one question about energy. And in the Q&A, you're able to upvote. So if you like the question, you're able to put a thumbs up so that your question will be answered. Also, you can use the chat. We'll be screening the chat so as to make it as interactive as possible. We're going to break this webinar into two different sections. First, we'll start off with three 15-minute talks by venture capitals from Brazil, from Mexico, and one from the United States, but is Latin American in origins. And then we'll do a quick lightning round of questions where you get to ask the VCs questions that you have. And after that, we'll do a fireside chat with Alan Taylor from Endeavor and my good friend, Shari Losberg. So Shari's going to be the one moderating, as she's the real expert, and she's the one who can help out with all of this. But more than anything, we hope that over the next 2 hours, you'll be able to ask the questions that you want, get the answers you're hoping to hear, and to learn from this experience. So I'd also like to thank Jacqueline Taylor from Global Programs for helping us make this all happen. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Shari Losberg.
Well, welcome to everyone who is joining us today from across Latin America and around the world. We are so excited to have a chance to really dive into some of the trends, challenges, and opportunities that are facing Latin America, venture capital, and the entrepreneurs that venture capitalists want to invest in. I am delighted to quickly introduce our panelists, but really want them to introduce themselves for over the course of their chance to connect with each of you. And so first of all, we have Hernan Fernandez, who is a graduate from MIT, from the Sloan School, is in fact an old student of mine, and is one of the leading venture capital investors in Mexico, leading as a co-founder and general partner of Angel Ventures in Mexico and across Latin America. Hernan, I'm going to look to you now to walk us through some of your insights from these turbulent times.
Thank you, Sherry, for that fantastic introduction. And well, it's great to be back, I guess. But certainly looking forward to be on campus anytime soon. MIT means a lot to me for sure. So my name is Hernan Fernandez. I'm the founder of Angel Ventures. So we're based in Mexico City, but we have also now spun to other parts of Latin America. Namely, we have an office in Peru, in Colombia, and also one in Guadalajara. And our current mandate is to manage the Pacific Alliance Fund. So this is the fund that covers Mexico, Chile, Colombia, and Peru, as we're seeing a lot of traction and a lot of synergy among many of these markets. So the name Angel Ventures might be a little bit deceiving, since we actually started as the first angel investor network in Mexico back in 2008. Hence, we kept the name of Angel Ventures, and I would say that over 100 investors that were angels in the early days now are kind of like the secret sauce to what we hope is a successful portfolio. So regarding COVID, I have some slides to share. So just give me 1 second, and apologies for the mess you're about to see, but yeah, it is what it is. Okay, guys, here we go. Okay, so again, I think what's really relevant here, and I will try to keep a track of time as well, was that imagine being in the shoes of a BC back in, in let's put it like December, right? So December was like, oh, this thing is going on in China. Oh, that's terrible. Let's pray for the Chinese, etc. Hope that they contain it. Then come January, then it was like, oh, it's just coming to Europe, right? Oh, okay, it's closer to home. Let's avoid like, trips here and there, etc. But then, it was really clear by the end of January that this was going global, right? And even perhaps so before that. And obviously, we were like looking it very cautiously and looking, just for statistical purposes, when we would hit, we will get the first case in Mexico. Brazil beat us to that, as in some other things regarding BC, but playing obviously a close competition. But that being said, in March, it was very clear that this was here to stay and for a while, right? So with that in mind, we just had like a conclave of sorts back at Angel Ventures, and we convened a mandatory all of our portfolio companies for both funds 1 and 2 to have like a chat on how this would look like in the near future. As you can imagine, we were in DEFCON 1, right? This was like very catastrophic to many companies. We had to make like a quick assessment of who will survive and who will not. What were the best chances? We also had some money to invest, and we actually had to decide if we were continue to invest or we need to preserve our current portfolio and the ones that are doing well. So you can imagine it was like completely revolutionary in that sense. So I would say that we kind of like set apart the companies in 3 different batches, right? There were some of these companies that will certainly see like an operational benefit, right? So if people were staying at their homes and they were like, getting goods and services delivered, or they have like more time at their home to consume goods and services, these companies will obviously see a tailwind, right? So, I will not mention them, at length, and probably we can, dig deeper towards the end of the presentation, but certainly anything that has to do with telehealth, telemedicine, whatever, edtech, last mile delivery, these things, we knew that they were going to see a tailwind. So obviously we were not very concerned of them. In any case, we were ready to deploy additional capital for them to capture the opportunity. Then the second batch was the ones that were the ones that we knew that there had to be some sort of adjustment for them to carry on with a good business, right? So, for example, mobility or proptech and many fintechs, I would say that happened in this batch. So this was very interesting because as I will show you a little bit later, we had to do some quick adjustments. So B2C at some point was severely high, damaged by the current ongoing pandemic, but many of them, we had to go back to our, to our context and whatever, and enact B2B like out of, the blue. So in many of these companies, what we saw was an interesting factor that we internally, we even call it that August is the new February, in the sense that we started seeing in many of these verticals, the same level of revenues that we had in February were coming back in August or September. So I think this is positive, and for many of these companies that opened like a new line of business, I think this was something quite good, and they will continue to capitalize. And then obviously, code red, we have to also deal with companies that could potentially be a write-off, right? So these companies were like the main considerations were companies that were planning to fundraise during the first half of 2020, because we knew it was going to be a pretty chaotic scenario, and also companies that were severely impacted by the current pandemic, right? So things that might have to do in travel or certain aspects of mobility, etc., were in this list, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what happened with some of those. So I will say our holistic response in this sense was obviously the portfolio-wide briefing. we went over all the opportunities in the portfolio, and kind of like told them like the general overview, and kind of like we actually set up like a blueprint of what we expected of these companies. We switched it from quarterly reporting to monthly reporting in certain key data, so to keep on track and stay on top of the game for all of these companies. Then we had one-on-one action plan sessions to do like a deep dive in the core business of the company and take a look into their whole like Michael Porter's I just forgot about like a different template, but how will your suppliers be impacted, how your buyers will be impacted, how the whole like value chain will be impacted, and what we could do to to get ahead of our game. And obviously 360 assistants, right? At Angel Ventures, we pride ourselves in always being there for entrepreneurs, and we have a pretty extensive team of over 27 people among these three countries. So obviously, we created like WhatsApp groups and let companies know that we were there 24/7 and that we were there to help. So I think that that message was loud and clear. Obviously, the portfolio action plans that we took, first and foremost, obviously safety, right? Family and team were our uttermost concern, and for us, founders in many cases are good friends and sometimes even family, depending on how long have we stuck with them. But certainly, we encourage work from home and understanding what were the conditions that would allow them eventually to go back to the office, or just leave some core areas of their companies to stay online or in the office, etc. Then obviously team alignment, right? Understand that work from home or from a distance will require from a good effort from everyone. We all had to deal sometimes with children or part-time kindergarten teachers, a bunch of us. So teams will need to accommodate all of those things that were hard for everyone, right? Obviously, continuity and continuity. We actually requested different scenarios from most companies regarding how will this play in a good way, in a neutral kind of like heuristic way, and if everything went downwards, how will this play out, right? And understand in terms of the cash reserves that we had, the liabilities that we could get, but even for companies that were doing fairly well or okay, and that they had cash to burn for the next 12 to 18 months, we actually had to create a scenario of a potential shutdown to understand the implications. So obviously that's never the kind of scenario that an entrepreneur wants to hear, but in this case, it was important to at least understand that scenario, right? And obviously a creative engagement of empathetic outreach. And in this sense, for example, re-engaging with B2B and trying to track those leads, I think you cannot go like kind of like help us out, we're in a fire, sir, right? We actually got some consultation from communication experts on how we should engage our customers in this sense. And it was like more, hey, we're here for you, to our current base of customers is like, whatever you need, we're here for you, we're here to understand, etc. Right? So I would say that among other recommendations, there were like 4 things that came quickly to our mind, right? Obviously, and I'm pretty sure like many of my co-panelists say will reiterate on this, but low-hanging fruit was like freeze new hires, right? Like until we understand what this is and how bad are we going to get impacted, freeze new hires and eliminate non-essential spending, scrutinize the org chart, etc. Obviously, the common idea of fixed cost was blown away in the sense that we were renegotiating contracts with our landlords or many other suppliers or customers to the extent that we hope that there will not be like a long-term degradation, but obviously most of them were very accommodating of the situation, right? And obviously we're all part of a food chain, and both suppliers and customers were going to do the same, right? In terms of pricing, obviously low prices and try to remain competitive. We were very, very conscious about where we could extract some other things, but obviously we were freeze non-unit economic positive, launches or products that we were currently offering. And partnerships, I think that was key. And I would say that that's where our angel investor network and our LPs were super helpful, because we literally ask for each and every one of these companies for 15 to 20 leads that they will think that it will be fundamental today. And for example, we have a company in Urban that was B2C transportation of people between their places of work, and literally in 1 month we flipped to have these people come to work in to industrial plants or whatever using this transportation, and even delivering goods with Amazon or Mercado Libre or many of these guys, right? So we literally had to take seats out of the urban vans to make them compatible to delivery of goods that certainly was not core in the business model. So I think that overall that's kind of like we engaged. I'll be looking forward to my co-panelist discussions, as I think that we're just hitting on time. But again, I think that the key lesson learned was that good companies and good entrepreneurs are resilient by nature, and even in a pandemic of these proportions, they were able to react, right? And if you had what it takes to be a good VC and you're resourceful and you try to be there, obviously you will try hard to not be a nuisance or an obstacle, but an enabler in these very trying times.
That's great. Thank you so much, Hernan. And I know there are a couple of questions. I just want to say that the slides will be available. The whole webinar will be posted on YouTube after the webinar is complete. So thank you, Hernan, because I think that's a beautiful way to sort of open the conversation around when the tsunami hit, how and in what ways that triage, the prioritization, the three buckets that you describe in terms of pivots, folks who are going to build back better, for whom in an upside down way, the pandemic represents a great opportunity. And that last inevitable bucket of red flags of folks whose businesses may well be killed by the pandemic. But I also think your concrete overview of sort of, so what did the roadmap look like? How did you add value? How did you meet the needs concretely of your portfolio companies scrambling to try and figure out what to do and in what order and how to pay for it? So I think that's a great way to set the table. And so thank you. And now I will ask our second speaker, our second panelist, Alicia Chong Rodriguez, to join us from the other side of the table, from the entrepreneur's perspective. Alicia, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, but I will also add that Alicia is a former student who I take great pride in as well. Welcome, Alicia.
Thank you, Sherry. Let me share my screen. I'm very happy to be here. And thank you for having me. I'm happy to participate here today. And I just wanted to kick off by saying that I'm a very proud Latina as well, besides being very proud to be your student, Sherry. And I wanted to share that I was born and raised in Costa Rica. Both my parents are Peruvian, and one of my sisters was born in Brazil. I also pursued my undergrad studies in Mexico. So I will share with you my perspective as a Latina that has lived in the US for only 5 years. And this year our startup, Bloomertech, we closed our first round of funding of $3 million. We becoming the first VC-backed startup in women's health that has a core focus outside of the reproductive system and the breast cancer fields. We focus on heart disease and stroke in women. So we're driving digital healthcare towards inclusive platforms, and that's a really big deal. And even though for us, according to the typical statistics of only 2.7% of overall investments in the US going to female founders, which I don't really know how much of that goes to Latinas, and well, the other percentages of that in the healthcare investments, only 3% are going to women's health. We just had to ignore all of those statistics because we had been working hard on an amazing and non-conventional solution anyway for a deep problem that just got more augmented during the pandemic. And by now we've all seen it and healthcare needs to be more personal and inclusive. Each one of us can respond differently to the same disease or conditions. And we really need to understand each individual's unique physiology and triggers so that we can tailor the most optimal treatments. So this is why at our company, we've developed a clinical grade remote monitoring system in the form factor of a discrete bra. Yes, it's a woman's everyday bra that she can wear all day. And now it digitizes meaningful information using our sex-specific AI digital biomarker engine. And it's a comfortable multi-lead ECG medical device that is tailored to each body type as any bra would. And now, despite the difference in breast tissue and sizes, it continuously captures high fidelity signals from the body to provide individualized health insights to patients and physicians, preventing adverse health outcomes. Today, we've tested this in early feasibility studies at the MIT Clinical Research Center. And as you can see in this snippet of the phone, that's my own live ECG signal. It gives a glimpse of a pre-processed raw data and the quality of waveform that we are able to capture with this type of device. Throughout the pandemic, we've been building towards our design controls so that we can get FDA clearance for our devices. And we've included all of the integration across all of the bra sizes and software that enables physicians and patients to share data for instant corrective medical interventions that can save lives and costs. It is important for us to reiterate that at no cost to the woman's lifestyle and daily habits, the physiological and patient input data get uploaded to our platform, where they're automatically analyzed to produce the health insights and reports for the physician's review and the patient engagement. In summary, like what we have is a high diagnostic yield, specially tailored to women with patient compliance, comfort, and incentivized care. So the changes that were made during the pandemic have opened people's minds to how they can use technologies to get answers to their symptoms in a new way. Including devices and virtual appointments, people are now more open to this type of innovation. We have taken one step further, and we've now partnered with cardiologists and innovating technologies to make the future of cardiac care more than remote. We want it to be inclusive, value-based, and preventative. And I do remember back when I signed our preferred term sheet, which was right before New Year's Eve. So for me, it was interesting that Hernan mentioned that time frame from a VC's perspective, because for us, there was also that mindset. We had a very different vision of what our year 2020 as a company would be like. We then closed the round at the end of February, and we only had 10 days in our office with our newly hired employees, and then the pandemic was declared. So we all got to go work from home. Even more starking for us, the doctors that we work with that are using our devices and we constantly talk with were suddenly in the front lines. So it was like our communication that we used to text and email all the time got completely disrupted because we didn't want to intervene in a situation that was global and that was just increasing in numbers here in Boston. So also over time, we didn't know that our business could be deemed essential because COVID patients started to show arrhythmias and different heart palpitations. And also most of the frontline workers, if you think about it, they're women. So we kept learning things like that. And as time passes, we continue to learn and adapt. Also, to give you an example, pre-COVID, in one of the hospitals that we work with, they were receiving on average 18,500 female cardiac patients per month. 6,600 of those patients were new patients, and the rest were recurring patients that were constantly coming back to the hospital. So now doctors, because of the pandemic, are switching to do virtual visits. They can't do their usual physical checkup, but now what they check is people's refrigerators, what they eat, They understand their lifestyles better to provide better treatment plans for their type of lifestyle. And remote patient monitors like ours are on the highest demand ever, when just a year ago, people that, especially those not in the healthcare field, and then some in the healthcare field as well, would certainly doubt that medical devices could ever become democratized, as with every other industrial revolution. The pandemic has hit a real accelerate button in digital health. And the thing is, when it comes to health and medicine, we are so behind compared to all of the other industries, like the automotive industry, e-commerce, security, like they're all already in the digitization age. But for medicine, we're more in like between the second and the third. Because if you think about it, like think about your experience in the hospitals, they still transfer information using fax. They do a lot of handwritten paperwork. There's a lot of interoperability inefficiencies, long waiting times to finally have your doctor's appointments. Plus, the regulatory processes for devices can take so long that the device upgrades can happen every maybe 5 to 10 years. And it's not like consumer facing technologies that every year we have these new features, these new upgrades. It's actually pretty slow. And when we think about other industries using AI, big data, and robotics, we've already seen that we have like this immediate access and we're all interconnected, right? Like that's the way we're connected right now via Zoom. Uh, but we also realize that a lot of mistakes that other industries have made in terms of algorithmic bias, we don't want that to happen to healthcare. An algorithmic bias is, for example, when face recognition doesn't recognize your face because of the color of your skin, or in some algorithms that they were trying to use to hire the best, to recruit the best talent. Amazon actually had built an algorithm for this, and it was basically leaving all of the women behind because it was training its data set to be similar to the top executives, and most people in the top are actually men. So there's a lot of bias in these other fields that we don't want. We want to learn from that and not replicate it in healthcare. Um, so so definitely there's a lot of things that, even though medicine is now with an accelerate button and we can move faster, thanks to the pandemic, we really have to think through how we build these solutions that are unique to each individual's physiology. And then when we look at these remote monitors, right, like the way that we see this, I am sure that if you look at what was 60 years ago and you look at that big boom box, and then you look at this at the Apple Watch that was launched 2 years ago with an ECG device, you definitely think that the Apple Watch, like, it's much better than having that thing in your back, right, for a remote monitoring. It still faces challenges, right? It's in your limbs, so it doesn't give you a whole context of your whole body. It has intermittent, and then the algorithms are built for one size fits all, and not really personalized yet. When we look at what people are using in hospitals right now, it's the patches. The patches are still very in the innovation side. This is what we use in hospitals today, and they were launched 10 years ago, the same year as the first iPhone. So that's the technology that we're using right now as the gold standard, or the latest and greatest, I guess. And we still use the Holter monitors, which were designed 20 years ago. So we do envision that we can fight all of these biases and build more everyday clothing that can integrate easily into your daily life and give you data when you need it the most. And especially nowadays that all of us are very conscious that we need to take care of ourselves. I think that's where digital health can get accelerated. So this is why we're working hard. We want to solve the unacceptable problem that current devices are one size fits all and not tailored to each individual's unique physiology. And our team is an MIT team. We graduated from the Computational Cardiovascular Research Group, the Collective Intelligence Center, and the Integrated Design and Management programs. And we've hired talent. We've grown to be 3 times bigger than we were at the beginning of the year. So definitely this has been a year of growth for us. We have expertise in user-driven integrated design, sex-specific computational algorithms and biomarkers. And what we've hired talents that are top experts in the apparel, regulated technologies, and flexible sensors fields. And we've also surrounded ourselves with expert cardiologists, as I mentioned before. Also for us, it's really valuable that throughout this process, for me, particularly as someone coming from Latin America, having met the right people to become our investors, we have amazing investors that have been very supportive, and part of the strategy, the redefinition of and the progress throughout this pandemic. Our lead investor is the Material Impact Fund, and the partner that joined our board of directors is Adam Sharkawi. He's an executive with over 30 years of experience in the cardiovascular medical industry. We also have Joanna Bell, who is the founder of Boston Scientific, which a fun fact is that Boston Scientific is the company that is the #1 employer in my country, Costa Rica. So I have a lot of friends that work in Boston Scientific. And Dr. Callum McRae, who is the vice chair of scientific innovation at Brigham and Women's Hospital and is leading the One Brave Idea Fund, which is between AstraZeneca, Google Verily, Life Sciences, and the American Heart Association are part of this fund. So we have supported ourselves and built a network around us to strengthen how we're moving forward. And I think that was very helpful throughout these turbulent times. And just to wrap up, I wanted to show you something very personal and how getting funding in the US to accelerate our company's growth has been so powerful to me. Despite turbulent times, I think there's no better time than today to solve problems that you feel are unacceptable. And as I mentioned, ever since I was a young kid in Latin America, I think I thought that I was going to study, get a job, and grow in that career. I wasn't that exposed to entrepreneurship. I was very exposed to entrepreneurship when I came to study at MIT. And I realized that in my journey, in my life, I have a picture here in the left of me in the soccer team. I was the only girl in the soccer team. And we had to basically fight with the coach to get me in. And then things changed, right? Like then a lot of girls also joined the soccer teams, and now there's championships. So you see that changes. And then when I was in undergrad in Mexico, I created Mente, which is a group for women in technology. And Mente grew so big, like I got a Pioneer Award for building this student group, which was really important to me because I wanted to make female friends, right? But it was what I did in my extra time. And it grew so much, and we started to get funding from different companies that were supporting women in STEM, but it was something really new. And then years later, we launched with a nonprofit organization, a program called Mente en Acción, which is still ongoing, and it's a 12-week program for girls to learn about technology, leadership, and empowerment. And then I did this all the time, like working in parallel in the semiconductor industry. Like my core focus was building integrated circuits. And I think like being exposed to all those things, I never knew that I had what it takes to be an entrepreneur until I met other entrepreneurs, which is why I love this type of conversations, because I think Latin America's entrepreneurship is growing significantly despite these turbulent times. And by getting exposed and meeting and seeing other people's stories is what like made me decide, okay, I think I can do this. Even though I didn't have the network when I came, you slowly build it. So Thank you.
Well, that's a very powerful speech. It's a very powerful personal story. So thank you, Alicia, for telling us the incredibly inspiring path of Bloomer Tech and how it has responded during the course of the pandemic to be a part of the solution that digital health can bring now sort of in a revolution in so many countries that will stay long after the pandemic is past, and for Bloomer Tech's ability to leverage on those opportunities to provide better and more personalized healthcare to women is such a wonderful story. It's important for us to hear that, and I really appreciate you grounding it as part of a larger personal journey and your own background from Latin America and the differences and the ways that you continue to contribute and see changes taking place today across the region. So thank you. And so now I would love to sort of balance the entrepreneur's voice and invite Moises Swirsky, who leads MSW Capital, another leading seed stage investor, this time based in Brazil, to give us an overview from the investor side of the table in Brazil during these turbulent times.
Thank you very much, Sherry. Thank you very much for inviting us to share a lot of our experience of this last year or of this year. I'm just proud to speak after Hernan. He kind of, in general ways, we live the same challenges. And best luck to Alicia. It is our target to find Alicia and Alicia like in our business. I am Moises Swirsky. I'm founder of MSW Capital and one of its partners now. MSW is a venture capital firm, and we have a very specific position that most of our LPs, we manage funds, and our LPs are large corporations. And given that, we have a double mission that is in the same time serve the corporation as an accelerator for their innovation strategy projects, and also keep an eye to guarantee that we select and help startups to develop into sustainable companies. We learn with time that these purposes, they could be made together in the same side of the street. So helping corporations and transforming startups are the same job. And if we have doubt in any point, the priority will be always for the startup. I represent the corporation that were with us in our first fund. 4 of them are large global corporations. The other are big Brazilian ones. BV is a big bank, BB Insurance, a telecom, and a development agency for entrepreneurship of Rio. We have a small portfolio of 16 companies that was developed in the last 4 years. This is us. And I want to share what was our experience from March to now. When the March of 17, when the quarantine was declared in Brazil, we really got concerned. Concern is a light word for we are really afraid what's going to happen to our portfolio, that we are investors in seed capital and Series A. And we start thinking how we could help this portfolio do not lose 4 years of work. So, and it was clear to us that we have to start a very intense communication process. We already have a very active management relationship with all the companies. And then when we reach them out for one seminar to discuss the moves at the first moment. This was March, and the motto of the seminar was survival. Let's safety, everybody goes to home offices. We were concerned, there was the concern that we could lose efficiency, productivity, or even how to advance the business. And a very strong call for cutting costs and saving all resources to enlarge, to stretch runaways. But that's when we start talking about that, and we observe that they were already in that mode. This was the move going on, and we learned very quickly that they were managing the crisis in a great way. They understood the change, and they adjusted for that change. And then this was somehow for us, we expected this to happen, but this was a kind of surprise. They were much stronger and prepared to crisis than we could imagine. This is also related to our selecting. We select always business with very strong entrepreneurial capabilities. And they were there, and they were functioning. In April, was clear to everybody that just reducing costs and be safe at home would not take us far. And then we have a lot of seminars like that, and then in our discussions, the call was get closer to your customers, reassess products, get close one to the other. And the priority of the leaders were to build a new vision ahead of the crisis. And this was like in all companies. Some of them were very lucky because all our invested companies, they are in digital solutions. So some of them, they were very benefited operationally from the crisis, other not so. And I want to share, not taking much time, some of the statements that from the entrepreneurs. You pick some of them for you to see how the crisis were taken by all these companies. The first one, it is a digital kind of a digital library to with having the teacher and the families and the students connected to improve reading ability and learning. Their platform has, before the crisis in February, they had 200,000 students in the platform. In 3 months, that number went up to 1,350,000 students. And they were able, they had the capability to grow in that velocity. And this, of course, brought revenues to a level much higher than expected for this year. We have another invested company that is a marketplace for credit recovery. People call the company to clear the debts. And then it's amazing how this kind of behavior grew during the quarantine. People trying to have a better credit rating and going behind after this kind of digital system to clear their loans. So this was like behavior that grew highly during the quarantine. But we have companies that they absolutely, in the beginning, they saw their sales going off. And these guys say we initially lost sales. This bought us time to think. And they anticipated a lot of actions they were in the future. And as Hernand said, in the last month became like February. It was not August equals February, it was like September equal February. And they went back in track. All of them, because they want to make sure that they have resources for the next step, went for a new round of searching for resources. And half of them we are able to help and get also new investors to this company. So the story of the crisis for these guys, for these entrepreneurs, was positive. They have today stronger companies. We did not lose any company. They were stronger, and they built a new vision for their business plans. And we learn how entrepreneurship makes it's like natural for them to live through the crisis. And for us, is like a very special opportunity to share with them that stories. What came to us now in that we are after 7 months, there are some fundamental things that we have to consider when we're looking ahead for what is the impact of this crisis to venture capital. We just choose 4 things that we think is more significant. One is that feeling that we are working much more than before and maybe not accomplishing so much. and how we balance this again of this feeling of acceleration, a lot of action, and the results are still not, I'm not sure that we have it. The other factor that is going to be in our scenarios is our life on the Zoom. Here we are, people from all different space. We are all over with different people. We are connecting, but personally, in the end of the day, you go down to the street and you don't know where you belong anymore. So for Latin America, this feeling is very strange because we love to be friends in our block, as we love also to be global. So how we take advantage of this feeling of simultaneity. And one of the toughest things that we're going through is this sense of vulnerability. The fragility of mankind was never so universal, so clear, that of course some business took advantage of quarantine, but in general, we did not how to deal with all this problem. And this was very clear, even in the level of governments, in level of companies, or in very different levels. And finally, one of the major fundamentals of the scenario that's coming ahead is the clear awareness that we are not going to solve this ourselves, by ourselves. We need the other. And if you don't use your mask, you're imposing your virus to the other, and that's the main reason for the mask, not so much protecting yourself. And these four things that expose so much all of us may be factors that will be a good discussion later that could be showing to us that we may be in the vertex of a new age, a time that we may be doing things, like I wrote here, planting trees that we don't see mature, a time that will push strong for deep technology, for renewal, for higher security in our lives, and a time for extraordinary innovation and entrepreneurship. And clearly, this is the opportunity for venture capital. So I wrote that first, the future will be built by us, entrepreneurs.
Thank you so much, Moises. It's good to have the first part end on a more positive note. And I think before we get to the questions, if we can invite Hernan and Alicia back, so that we'll have everyone there for the questions from Shari. So Shari, I'll let you take it over again. But I do think that something is really important and something that we should think about for the audience. There were 3 or 4 questions, but one of the questions is really people are, and it was to Hernan, but I think Moises is also, is it a good time to be more aggressive in investment money for a retired investor? So I think, from the VC, people are really looking for you to hear, your quick, as Shari said, lightning responses so that we can get through some of these questions, but also to give the audience a sense of what you guys see the market being like.
Sure, I will answer real quick. I guess as a good economist, you will reply, it depends. Obviously, it comes to your risk appetite. And the good thing is that venture capital by nature is counter-cyclical, right? So it means that it is very likely that it will outperform other stocks during this economic downturn, in the sense that while other companies are probably just like laying off people or cutting costs, it's usually the times where a well-funded startup will recruit talent, and we will be able to take over, different opportunities. So if you have a diversified portfolio, it's a good idea to take a look into these assets. But by no means, you should consider such a risky asset as your main or only option.
Let me just add a little. Innovation is it brings a completely different solution by definition. It's not connected to macroeconomic trends. So if you invest in a venture capital fund, you reduce your risk, and the risk of these funds tend to be not connected to macroeconomics, means that they have a good place in your investment project, like investment portfolio. I could see this class of assets growing very much in future years. Interest rate is very low, and the opportunity in venture is growing very positively. But go through funds. Don't if you are like you have a mature like a guy like me that I'm 70. I would prefer to go through a fund, not to a specific company.
Well, I think that's actually a great sort of big picture view of some of the challenges involved. I want to quickly look to Alicia. There's a question in chat about hurrah for Bloomer Tech, and what are the growth and expansion plans moving forward?
Yeah, so we're basically scaling manufacturing so that we can commit to all of the pipeline of pilots that we have. And our biggest milestone is looking towards that FDA clearance.
Yes, and any sense of timetable on any of that?
Yeah, so it's probably next year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then this was a question back to you, Hernan. I think, again, sort of looking at as folks are reducing OpEx, does it then become an opportunity perhaps for offshoring, right, of talent, engineering, and other kinds of more sophisticated talent in lower cost markets? And is that something that you see as a trend?
Yeah, we think that's a fascinating, area to explore right now. There's been a lot of articles of why Silicon Valley is dead and many things. Obviously, you have to don't buy into the hype, but the reality is that, now with this new normal, many engineering companies or positions that were probably, needed to have like a high degree of concentration will be living offshore. So we started to see that of engineers moving to more affordable cities within the US. And more, I think that's actually happening in Latin America. It's more common than not that we're actually getting more pipeline from US-based companies because they have an engineering facility in Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, Brazil. I think that there's pockets, happening in different parts. And we're actually, for example, looking into a company that is doing into video games. And sorry, my dogs. You have to excuse me, normal.
Hello, dogs.
Yeah, I love my dogs. I know you do too, Sherry. But that being said, I think that what you mentioned, it's certainly one of the future of work. Is going to be one of the most interesting areas, and I think that is really a long-term shift that we will see happening.
I think that's great. And so I wanted to ask, that's a sort of way to segue into, so both of you as the investors, as well as you, Alicia, are able to sort of tell that story of leveraging the good that comes out of virtual, leveraging the good that comes out of this moment of crisis. But so what does that mean going forward? What kinds of larger emerging trends do you see? Are we done in terms of crisis mode? And if so, how do you see either investment opportunities or Alicia, how do you see sort of opportunities for you specifically related to what comes next?
Yeah, so I can go first. I think one of the big things that this has, the virtual communication has opened, is the fact that we were able to start recruiting talent, for example, in other cities. At the beginning, we thought that we were going to build our team like we have a physical product, so we do a lot of hands-on work. And maybe I wasn't clear as sharing like that our technology is something that we're scaling, and we've de-risked how we're producing that in a way that it's not like the typical smart fabrics that you see, that you have something plastic on top of it. It's actually, it feels and looks like textile, right? So that's the major thing of our sensors. So de-risking the scaled manufacturing has been a big thing, and being able to source talent from anywhere. We started with the US, and now we're starting to explore outside of the US as well, as we grow our team. But we do want to keep that culture, that company culture of everyone feeling part of the team. Like we've done immersives when people come to Boston, and we've worked here hands-on for a period of time. Obviously very careful in following all of the protocols, or establishing protocols within the company. So I do foresee that as we continue to grow, we'll keep establishing new ways of working together and growing our team with the best talent that we can find.
That's perfect. And so Moises or Hernan, any closing thoughts on emerging trends that you're excited about?
I guess we'll continue to take advantage of the digital solution, focusing in bringing good solutions for lower class markets. So Latin America, that's our experience. In Brazil, most of the population already use smartphones, and we are able, I think the trend is to continue to improve their and bring products that have the quality and could assess these markets, improving their quality of life. That's focus of most of our investments.
Yeah, I will add to that that anything that's tele right now, it's interesting to see how it plays out, and if it's here to stay like long term, or it's just during the pandemic. But if you think about like cities in emerging markets, right? For example, to take my child to the doctor, it takes me 1 hour to get there. Probably I'll spend 1 hour there, and then 1 hour in my way back. And my wife probably already with a 50% chance of hitting it or nailing it, will know by Google what the child has, right? So we just tried telemedicine, and it's a seamless experience. 15 minutes. Obviously, if there's anything that you should like consider, them, it's definitely like a mandatory doctor visit. But I do think that many of these trends will be here to stay. And yeah, I couldn't agree more with Moises, right? What we're seeing in emerging markets, it's very different from what you'll see in deep tech hotspots like US or Israel or Europe. I think that there's limited capability for raw core innovation in emerging markets. There are some outliers, and wouldn't even count China, India, it's in a league of its own, and you will find some hot pockets in Brazil or Chile and Mexico, right? But I think that the opportunity is just, huge populations that are just going into, the middle class and that are using very prevalent smartphones and everything. And just think about this framework about, some goods and services are very cheap and heavily subsidized even by government, right? Transport being one key. And then you go to another end, for example, like Uber, where Uber, some of its main cities are in Latin America. So think about like what happens in between, right? So mobility, for example, it's one of our big focuses at this fund because, people need different options to become mobile. And it's not like you can, you have in San Francisco or New York, you have subways and cars are so cheap to acquire, etc. So I think that the population that these emerging middle classes represent in emerging markets is massive. And what you'll see in Istanbul, Mexico City, Rio, or Jakarta, it's certainly much more different from what a traditional BC will see in developed economies. But I think that's a massive opportunity for growth.
Well, that is actually a beautiful segue into our next speaker. Thanks a lot. I think each of those insights, your points of view from your day jobs, being able to share across both opportunities and challenges is really helpful. So thank you, each of you. And now we're going to actually sit down and have a chat with Alan Taylor. Alan is I don't know your exact title, but Alan is the power who runs the Endeavor Catalyst Fund, and brings a wonderful perspective of investment across most markets inside Latin America, but also globally as part of the work of Endeavor Catalyst as a really specialized in emerging and frontier market investment fund. And I'm going to let Alan introduce himself, but also a little bit about Endeavor for those of you in the audience who don't know them, though I think there's a nice chunk of folks from Endeavor who are joining us today. Hi, everybody. And then also a little bit about how the separately run and operated Endeavor Catalyst Fund works. So welcome, Alan. Glad to have you. Not an old student.
Of course, Sherry. Thank you for the invitation, and everyone. Great to see you. I'm happy to be here. And Nan, thanks for the intro, because as soon as you said Sao Paulo, Mexico City, Istanbul, Jakarta, my ears perked up. I said, oh, I must be next, right? This is what we do. But it's great to be here. I am the managing director of a fund called Endeavor Catalyst that invests across emerging markets. But as Sherry referenced, the fund actually belongs to a larger global organization called Endeavor, where I've worked for the last 15 years. And Endeavor believes fundamentally that entrepreneurs change the world, right? That actually talent is equally distributed kind of everywhere. There are great entrepreneurs, but what's missing are sort of the networks of mentorship and capital that can help them scale to create the jobs and create the economic opportunity in their countries. And so we have been working in Latin America for about 2 decades as Endeavor. We've now scaled to work across the Middle East, Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and even some sort of lesser served, lesser developed parts of Europe and the US. Today, that puts us in 37 countries. And our fund invests in all 37 of those countries, right? So you can think of us very much as a frontier market or emerging market kind of focused fund. We have a specific strategy where we co-invest into the Endeavor entrepreneurs. So into the men and women we've already kind of identified and selected for mentorship and support. We can then make a small investment with them. So it puts us in a unique position, and maybe we'll talk about some of this today, to kind of look across Latin America, across emerging markets globally, and see some of the things that are happening. And I'm excited to share. To give the audience, I guess, a sense, today, we've made about 150 equity investments, Series A, B, and C, over the last 8 years, and about half of those are in Latin America, in Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, Mexico, Uruguay, Chile. Peru, etc. So happy to talk about that. My own background, I'm a gringo, 100%. I grew up in California, but I lived and worked in Argentina in college and after college. And I've actually been at Endeavor since 2006. So I've been part of this movement and this effort of really trying to support what we call high impact entrepreneurs, right? The highest potential, sort of highest caliber, high integrity men and women building companies at the scale up stages for really the last 15 years. So Sherry, I think you're on mute.
I'm muted.
Come back to us.
Not a good way to run a fireside chat. So welcome. And I think maybe, you know, it will be instructive for me to hear, and I think for the rest of our audience, lessons learned from Latin America across to other markets you're in. But first, let's talk a little bit about Latin America. I think both Hernan and Moises have done a great job sort of talking about concretely on the ground, what they have seen, what those early days of response, and now moving forward, right, to what comes next. Maybe you can talk about it with a little broader lens across all of Latin America and what Endeavor Catalyst has seen.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Actually, when Hernan was presenting, I was all of a sudden back in March, right, when we were in crisis mode with all of our companies all around the region and the world. And, you know, frankly, it was a stressful, you know, 1 or 2 months there in March and April as we tried to sort out what to do, right? Endeavor really is kind of an ally and partner to entrepreneurs. And a lot of people are asking questions nobody had the answers to, right? So it's been a very, very interesting year. But I'll share a perspective that is sort of broader to all of Endeavor, what we see, and then specifically to Catalyst, because Endeavor supports entrepreneurs across industries, right? So a wide range of sectors and industries, tech and non-tech, right? And what we've seen very clearly in this pandemic and in the events that have unfolded is that the more traditional businesses, think of those as restaurants and offline, you know, gyms and beauty salons that are part of the Endeavor portfolio have really suffered, right? A lot of the things that required us to go in person and be with other people have had a hard year. And that we can get into those details, but that's where, you know, being well capitalized and well organized and well run and being able to make hard choices has been really important to those businesses. And it'll continue, I think, to be sort of a little bit of a slog for them for a while, right, until we can come out the other side of this thing and people can go back to being together in person again. Interestingly, though, the subset of our own portfolio for Endeavor that we actually invest in tends to skew towards technology and tech-enabled businesses, right? About 95% of the places we've actually made investments, we're a co-investment fund following venture capitalists. And so we tend to invest in the tech-enabled part of the portfolio. And those businesses, after sort of a momentary, you know, call it a 2-month window there in March and April of figuring out what was going to happen, most of them are actually in that category that Hernan and Moises both referenced of, you know, essentially businesses that are being accelerated by this, right? And so that is telehealth, e-commerce, grocery delivery, you know, lots of different things where we have seen really what's happening is we're pulling the future forward, right? Things we thought were going to happen over the next 5 years in some of these categories, somewhat driven by technology, but frankly, largely driven by drastic new radical changes in consumer behavior, people willing to do that doctor's visit, you know, over an iPad or willing to get things delivered for the first time, have really taken, you know, business plans we saw for companies over the next 5 years, and it all happened in 1 quarter, right? And we've all seen those charts and graphs of things like e-commerce adoption, you know, doubling in 2 months what had previously happened in 5 years or 10 years or 12 years, right? So I'd say that's a global phenomenon. It's certainly a global emerging market phenomenon, and we see it kind of across all the markets where we work in Latin America.
Let me just circle back to a couple things and just make clear for folks in our audience who don't know Catalyst. I just want to say that as Alan mentioned in passing, Endeavor Catalyst is a co-investment fund. And so we'll always partner with and be part of a larger funding round where other traditional institutional VCs like Hernan or Moises are making that commitment to invest. Then Catalyst, because they are supporting the Endeavor entrepreneurs who are part of their network, will also contribute out of this separate pot of money called Endeavor Catalyst. And so just because it's a unique, but also a very, very powerful model that is used across many different markets, but has been a game changer for Endeavor. And then the other thing that I just wanted to ask is, so you have seen inside Latin America really the same kinds of challenges across the other markets and regions that you're investing in. When you and I caught up last week to talk about this panel, you shared a really interesting approach to your thinking around the adaptation of technology and sort of the VC flow and talking about sort of waves of what you and your colleagues have seen. I think that's really interesting, and I would love for you to share some of that with our audience today.
Sure. Yeah, and Sherry, thanks for clarifying. I think it is important to say, you know, Endeavor has a unique model here where we spend a lot of time and resources trying to identify the right entrepreneurs, right? We really do think they're the heroes of the story. Then we try to help with mentorship, advice, support, opening the right doors, trying to help answer the right questions. And on the funding side, you know, we're trying to sort of crowd in more high quality capital by not leading rounds, but committing to be a part of these rounds, right? So then I can call up investors in Mexico City or New York or Silicon Valley or Singapore and say, hey, come look at these opportunities in Brazil or Peru or Ecuador. You know, this company's raising 10 million bucks. We've already committed $1 million, right? We're going to co-invest, but we're looking for somebody great to lead the round. And that's been an important part of our model. It also creates an interesting dynamic, which is essentially we don't have a specific thesis about a specific industry, right? So our thesis is entrepreneurs, right, are going to be the ones who change the world. And what we're kind of doing is holding up a mirror to the market where, you know, we're sort of seeing where those venture capital dollars are flowing and where the best entrepreneurs, frankly, and the best talent is attracted to work on the biggest, hardest problems. And so by not having a specific sector thesis ourselves, it gives us some pretty interesting data, right? And what I was sharing with Sherry last week is, you know, we shared this with our own investors at our investor meeting a couple months ago, is that we see these trends that happen in emerging markets where it really does play out in sort of waves of where the best entrepreneurs go to work on opportunities, and then therefore where the best investors go, sort of where the dollars are attracted to in scaling those companies. And, you know, oversimplifying a little bit, in every emerging market, you can look at, you know, how this played out in China and India and now Brazil, Indonesia, Turkey, Nigeria, et cetera, right? The first wave is consumer, right? It is consumer tech, it's e-commerce, it's all the things that, you know, then really are built to enable commerce to shift into a digital or online format. But very quickly behind that, you get this second wave of technology disrupting major industries, right? And probably the biggest one and the fastest moving one and the fastest growing one is disruption to financial services or fintech, where, you know, in our own portfolio, we've seen more growth in fintech over the last 24 months than any other category, right? And it goes hand in hand a bit with commerce because some of those are payment gateways, you know, payment systems, cross-border enablers, you know, lending platforms, things like this. But I think in that same second wave bucket, you get technology disrupting other major industries in these markets, right? So we've talked about a couple of them on this webinar, but disruptions to healthcare, disruptions to education, frankly, disruptions to transportation, right? What Endeavor calls smart cities, like moving things and people around. And it tends to be that those businesses get built kind of next in these waves that happen. And I'd say in a lot of Latin America, we are in kind of wave one going to wave two, right? In most of Spanish-speaking South America, I'd put Mexico in this category. Hernan, it'd be interesting to see in your own portfolio kind of the last 10 deals you guys funded, where they fit in these waves. But the third wave that happens after that is happening in Brazil, is essentially the B2b wave, right? The enterprise kind of technology wave, or what I think for emerging markets is really the digitization of the small and medium business economy, right? So you take the SME world, which is, frankly, tens of millions of people and tens of millions of jobs at these sort of small businesses, and you start to digitize certain parts of that economy, certain services, certain things, and they're simple stuff, right? But, software that's, you can do on your phone, that's very easy for tax filing that every small business has to do, right? These kinds of things that, it's almost inevitable that you can see these are going to become digital. But interestingly, we haven't seen that happen in any market first, right? The consumer wave happens first, the disruption to the major industries happens second, and this digitization of SMEs really happens third. And we're living right in the middle of that in Brazil, right? So now in Brazil, you'll see folks funding kind of new types of commerce, all kinds of things in wave two, and a lot of funding in wave three. Because once the wave starts, they don't really stop, right? So they sort of add on top of each other.
And so when you think about the differences that you see from the regions that you cover, which I guess is really sort of Southeast Asia, MENA, Middle East, North Africa, and some South Africa, Southern Europe, and then really deep inside Latin America. Is there, how does Endeavor work to build those links across, thinking about networks, thinking about opportunities, and what, for the folks who are listening in, do you think are opportunities for either entrepreneurs or investors based in Latin America to be thinking about other regions?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, just to clarify on the regions, we break down where we work into 6 regions, but 3 of them are where we do the most work, right? So Latin America, Southeast Asia, and the broader kind of Middle East, North Africa, including markets like Turkey and Egypt. Those are places where Endeavor has kind of the biggest footprint and the deepest penetration. And then the other 3 that are smaller are Sub-Saharan Africa, sort of Southern and Eastern Europe, and some of these underserved markets within the United States. And that's actually an interesting one to look at, because it turns out building a company in Louisville, Kentucky, or Detroit has a lot of the same challenges as doing it in Mexico and Brazil, right? Those markets actually, when it comes to this type of work, raising early stage capital, finding mentors, finding a community of entrepreneurs, the U.S. is not created equal, right, as a map. And there are actually a number of players now. The former founder of AOL, Steve Case, has started an initiative called Rise of the Rest to focus on all these underserved parts of the U.S., which, interestingly, Endeavor never did until 5 years ago, but then really realized, actually about 6 or 7 years ago now, that the model we were using and the work we were doing did apply to some of the markets within the U.S. But Sherry, to your question, I think there's some really interesting learnings for entrepreneurs and for angel investors and for folks who work in kind of the early stages of, call it the entrepreneur ecosystem, benchmarking or looking at other economies and other regions that look a lot like their own, right? And this is actually, my first lens on this is just one of learning and sort of benchmarking, right? It's not saying, hey, take your business and expand it to Indonesia tomorrow, but actually you can learn a heck of a lot if you're building an online education software platform, not only seeing what's happening in places like Silicon Valley in the US, but frankly, seeing what's happening in Southeast Asia, right? And seeing what's happening in some of these other places where the markets actually look a lot more like your home market.
Yes, where
right?
the insights
and
are so much more relevant, right? Where the insights are so much more relevant, where there are so many parts of the infrastructure that really are analogous or exactly like what you have to deal with inside your own market. I think that's a very powerful insight. Yeah. So I'm sorry, keep going.
No, I think, Sherry, you see this too from the work you do with G-Lab and the teams that go around the world, right? We still have people come to Silicon Valley and come benchmark against things that are getting built here, which I do think there's value in that, right? But you'll go back and realize that, you know, when you map out your kind of analogous business in the US, there's these other 7 things that are totally different about your home market. And that's probably the reason why the US players not in Brazil or not in Argentina or not in Chile, right? And so I think that, you know, what Endeavor's learned over the years is this kind of, call it emerging market to emerging market, knowledge sharing and benchmarking. And that's a big part of what we do now, right? As a peer-to-peer network is getting founders from these regions building similar businesses to connect with each other. There's a heck of a lot you can learn. The second lens on it is, at a certain point when companies get big, and now I'm talking about, you know, once they've really started to scale up. So maybe you've got, you know, tens of millions or a few $100 million in revenue, and you're thinking about your next market opportunity, there's this natural inclination to think about the biggest markets and think, oh, I should go to the US, or maybe I should go to China. But it turns out that for market expansion, what Endeavor's seen is taking a model that works in Brazil, let's take sort of some of these enterprise software B2b type plays, right? The absolute best markets for that company to go to next, if they can crack them, are Turkey, Nigeria, and Indonesia, because all the dynamics and the customer segments are exactly the same, right? Now, there's other stuff that's really hard. You got to do language, localization, get good teams. But in terms of like how and where the business scales, you know, going to those markets that are similar, I think is really interesting.
I think that's a great insight. So I'm going to ask you quickly your quick thoughts around something related, which is this notion of distributed startups, right? That talent is located, and our other panelists have talked about it. Alicia has talked about it in terms of her hiring, and both Hernan and Moises see that as well in companies that. As a long-lasting, permanent shift. Anything you want to say from your sort of global perch?
Yeah, so like I think this is going to be really interesting to see what happens over the next, call it 2 years, right? Yep. I don't think we'll actually know that much in 3 more months, right? Because we're going to kind of be where we are today.
Right.
But in a couple of years, to see if some of these things around kind of predominantly remote working actually stick and become embedded into our culture, and to see the ways in which that affects kind of team building and culture building, it's going to be fascinating, right? And my hunch is net, I mean, we're not going back to, quote, the way it was. I don't think we'll never go back to February 2020 and just push play again, right? But the version of the future that we're likely to live into is one where this globally distributed talent will have more access and more opportunities, right? Whether that's to start companies or to be on teams of scaling companies. And therefore, you know, the entrepreneurs and the teams and the leaders who can kind of be on the forefront of, well, how do you do that, right? How do you build culture for people who are all over the world? How do you build trust, right? We've started to hire our first employees that we've never met in person, right? How do you cultivate trust with those folks and build these relationships that really matter? we don't have all the answers there, but I'm super interested to see how it plays out. And per usual, I think the people who will benefit the most are not going to be giant multinationals who will be slow to react to this. It's going to be entrepreneurs, right, who are going to be out in front.
So I, as you heard me say, the power of the diaspora, it is, I think, finally going to be unlocked. And I think it can be a game changer in lots of different markets, not just as the investor or the advisor, but the ability, if you can get past these threshold challenges of, how do you do culture? How do you really put somebody on a day-to-day management role who's living a very different life, as a diaspora member in a faraway time zone? Yes, there are big challenges, and there are challenges around compensation structures, because somebody's living in a much higher cost environment. But my goodness, I think that this does present one more follow-on opportunity around the distributed startup and around diaspora talent pool. I wanted to ask a quick question, kind of a lightning question around, and this is something that somebody raised in the chat. So again, you have this great perch. What do you see in terms of VCs and the growth of VC in country, in particular markets? And do you see sort of easy correlation between entrepreneurial ecosystem growth and the availability of institutional in-country VC? Are you seeing other kinds of regional trends? Anything that you can pull some observation on?
Yeah, I'll try to give a short answer because it's definitely a question I could talk about for an hour. No, it's a super smart question. And I think a lot about this, right? Because actually for Endeavor to succeed, we think we need high quality, sort of smart, connected capital at each of the stages of a company's growth, right? So I think about it in kind of stages of financing. And, I don't necessarily mean like Series A, Series B. I mean, kind of more broadly, early stage, right? Angel seed, get going type money, starting to scale type money. And then, okay, now I'm global. And frankly, now I can probably access global investors, right? And because General Atlantic or whomever is going to come knocking at my door. Interestingly, this third layer is pretty built, right? At this point, Endeavor feels like once a company has really gotten to scale out of Latin America or the Middle East, global investors are going to back them, right? And a lot of the efforts happening, very good efforts, right? Backed by governments and institutions and different folks, is on that sort of a very initial startup capital scale. I think that's actually gotten a lot of energy and attention over the last, call it 5 to 10 years in markets like Latin America. We have way more stuff happening at the early stage than we did before. What I think is interesting is to try to put some real effort into that middle stage of how do you build more funds that look like Hernan's, right? How do you build more funds that can fund the Series A and Series B as those companies are starting to scale? And frankly, the things they need help with are also different, right? Because you're not doing product market fit. You're doing scaling the team, scaling to new markets, scaling your investor base and capital. And so, my view there, again, I'll try to keep it to kind of 1 minute, is the most developed market, frankly, in Latin America, but in all of the emerging markets on that piece of it today, beyond China and India, is Brazil, right? I think Brazil is actually building a pretty developed ecosystem there where there's still gaps and there's still holes and there's a lot to do. But we are seeing quite a bit of that happening. And part of it has to do with kind of this idea of success stories and generational talent, right? So you now have people who were at some of these earlier successful companies, right? They were part of building Mercado Libre, they were part of building Buscapé, like now going out into the ecosystem, and they're kind of a second generation of talent as angel investors, as founders, as employees.
And some of them are
But one
on
of
this
the-
webinar today.
Well, great, fantastic. But I think one of the challenges here is that the progress is lumpy, right? These ecosystems are not these perfect, complete things, right? So you can have a really good company, raise Series A and be off to the races, and then all of a sudden they find themselves in this like, how do I find the right investors for the next stage, right? And so I think thinking, for people who want to help build these ecosystems, thinking of the stages of growth and the stages of financing, and frankly, looking for market opportunities. I think pan-emerging market right now, there's a pretty big opportunity around that kind of, call it $15 to $20 million Series B check, right? There's not very many people in that space, and there's a lot of really good companies coming up into it. So I don't know. I mean, there's a lot more I could say, but I would say that Brazil's the most developed of these, what are still nascent ecosystems. Mexico is coming, right? And no other single market in Latin America is going to support a whole ecosystem by itself. And so you'll see investors like Kazakh Ventures, the guys are from Argentina, investing across really all of South America and Mexico now, right? And so when I talk to folks, let's say from Costa Rica or Honduras, and they say, how do I build a venture capital industry in my country? My typical response is, you want to build it for your region, right? Like you want to think about Central America as a whole, or Central America and Mexico, or and Colombia. Like I think even Hernan has found, while Mexico is a really big market, there are advantages in terms of the scale of also working in some of the other
Pacific
sort of,
Alliance.
what is Alianza de Pacifico, right? I was trying to think about what do we call that in English,
Yes.
on that side of the continent.
Yes, I think it's Pacific Alliance.
There we go. Got it.
And now it's my dog. Okay, so
I can get a dog if you guys want. I don't have one. I didn't know it was a requirement for the webinar.
Go along with it. What I wanted to say, I think we're now up actually to our transition over to sort of full panel Q&A, and I think there's a lot of good stuff that we've touched on here. I know that there are a couple of good questions in the chat as well. So let me just start off with this one. How can MIT and other similarly minded institutions help Endeavor and other VCs with the great work it's doing enabling VC ecosystems, right? So how do you build that broader point out? And can I actually just jump in and put in a little plug for the MIT REAP program, which Moises is joining and will be the risk capital stakeholder of. Let me make sure everybody turns on their video, please, because now we're back to full panel. So Hernan and Moises, if you can turn on video. And I just wanted to say that part of one answer to your question in the chat is around a multi-stakeholder approach to building out entrepreneurial ecosystems. So it's not just the money, and it's certainly not just government or academia, and it's not big corporate, and entrepreneurs are busy, right? They're not thinking about building out an ecosystem. They're thinking about building and scaling a company and changing the world. And so if you can bring leaders from each one of those individual communities from a city or a region together to think hard about what collectively you can do to move forward, it's a really, really powerful, good thing. We're thrilled in the MIT REAP program to have Moises join the new REAP Rio program, which will be launching in 2021. And, you know, I would also give a shout out to Alicia and our Legatum Center, which you are a Legatum Fellow, as I remember, which works across emerging and frontier markets to support entrepreneurs, and increasingly is focused on what can we do to support investors? What can we do to support growing out the entrepreneurial investment ecosystem alongside the entrepreneurial piece of it? I always like to say, you can't just invest in building the next generation of entrepreneurs. You have to invest in building the next generation of investors as well. It's absolutely critical. Okay, so that's my 2 cents. I would look at the rest of the panel. Who would like to sort of weigh in?
Let me just introduce a little bit about the REAP experience for Rio. This is one of these examples when you put together MIT knowledge and how to think about from MIT's perspective how to build a specific ecosystem for Rio. Rio has always been has a lot of capabilities in the area of energy. We have excellent infrastructure of education and research in that area. We have a lot of big companies that are established with the focus of energy in Rio. And today, if you talk to anybody that is in universities, they do not vision themselves working for a large company. They want to be starting their own companies. So there's such a big entrepreneurial move in Rio. So to put all this together, we are creating that project to build in Rio a ecosystem to develop opportunities in the energy chain, from generation to distribution, and this all catalyzed using the name of your fund, Alan, by MIT. So very glad. So we have government engaged using the method of MIT, and our MSW has the responsibility to bring the investor eye to this opportunity that's going to be busted by this MIT energy program for Rio de Janeiro.
Well, thank you, Moises. The goal of this is not to be a big plug or big marketing for REAP, but I really appreciate it, because I think what you've described is exactly the kind of effort that this program is making. Hernan, Alicia, anything on how to build out, build better the ecosystem supporting VC?
Yeah, so I wanted to share, like, I think strengthening the ecosystem includes a lot. Like, as an engineer when I was working in Latin America, I didn't get that exposed to entrepreneurship, or it wasn't top of mind, even though I participated actively in hackathons and different events, and I actually did know a few players building their own companies. But building a company is a huge commitment, right? It's not something that you just decide suddenly, oh, I want to build a company. It's something that you're planning to do for a long period of time, and you're committed to it. So it has to be something that you actually care about solving, and that you know that there's a market and that you can build a company around it. And I think for me, the transition, like, talking more about MIT, like being a Legatum fellow was really helpful, because it gave me that transition. I don't come with a background, like, I've had the privilege of having a very good education opportunities, but I came with scholarships, right? So, like, even like that, like, okay, after you graduate, you have to get a job, because otherwise, how are you going to sustain yourself, right? So when I wasn't ready for that, but I was still building my company, I had the opportunity to get the Legatum fellowship, keep working on my company while I was still a student, so that when I graduated, I was more ready for that next stage, right? But I had already made that conscious decision that this was what I wanted to work on. And I think in Latin America, we have a lot of talent that might have that uncertainty of leaving their jobs, because how do we sustain ourselves, our family, like uh, at the very beginning. So I think like it's what everyone has said, all of those stepping stones from the very beginning of like how to trigger your mind that yes, I can build this, and then how at each stage you continue just growing your ecosystem.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you
And
for that point of view. And okay, Hernan.
And my yeah, on my end, I think that most governments in the world have been infatuated with, building the mountain valley or the Tequila Valley here in Mexico, or the Silicon Beach, and I don't think that's the right approach. I mean, Silicon Valley had a lot of things going for itself, and there's very few places that can actually replicate, Route 128 or Israel, but that's another story. I think like locally or ecosystems, understanding that there's going to be flaws and that will be persistent, and probably they will take a generation to change. Obviously, I think that like organizations like Endeavor are super critical in connecting many of these dots. And one thing that Endeavor does very well, and that has done this traditionally, is make entrepreneurs the heroes of the movie, right? You need new role models. You need to find those very inspiring stories that overcame a lot of difficulties and just created like an amazing company that's employing a lot of people, generating wealth, that it's a success story all over the place, right? And you need like more and more. And I love in the US, the very good VC funds will probably tell you, they will not tell you about, yeah, we're in fund 9 and we have 2 trillion under management or whatever. They will say, yeah, we're the guys who backed Google or LinkedIn or whatever, right? And I really pride that angel ventures nowadays we can say, yeah, we're the guys who backed Questkey or Clip or Urban. Those are the credentials that we really like to share, right? So who needs like the best incubator or like the VC, with their most AUM, if you cannot just like pinpoint a couple of success stories that you have backed. So I think it's in the best interest of our ecosystems that we find these stories and that we empower them, right? If you own like an SME and you can buy entrepreneur, right? Support entrepreneur. If you have like an entrepreneur that that's having a hard time, it's very Latin American, right? Like, oh, he's a failure and you should get like a new job or whatever. Support that, embrace that failure, make entrepreneurs, like the epicenter of an entrepreneurial ecosystem. It's not governments, it's not big companies, it's not VCs, it's not incubators, it's entrepreneurs. And you have to make sure that the support network that you build around that really is in the best interest of entrepreneurs, not anything else.
I think that's a powerful answer. I am all about hero stories and that spotlight of telling the stories. Yes, of the people who win big, but also thinking about how culture, which is just human beings and how they behave, and how when somebody fails, how you as a human being react and respond to that. And particularly for folks who are in leadership positions, right, being able to be that role model and signal that shift in culture. Wow, that is such a powerful tool. So I couldn't agree more. I will also plug a book that I think is really powerful as well, which is the new version, the second edition of Brad Feld's book, Startup Communities, which is really a lot of what we've just talked about here, in this sense of putting the entrepreneur in the middle, at the heart of everything that is built around that entrepreneurial ecosystem. And I'm sure it's in Spanish. And it has a sort of more thoughtful. First edition was very sort of US centric. This one is a little bit more thoughtful in terms of global application and how and in what ways the basic principles apply in markets outside of a US one. And so I am looking here at, there's a couple of questions around logistics. And I want to say that I know that contact information for panelists, I think our webinar folks will be able to make that available after it's done. The webinar will show up on YouTube, and you'll get that link as well. And I wanted, and I think we've covered a lot of the good questions that have popped up. I see that we are coming in just about at our closing time of 2 p.m. here on the East Coast. I'd love to ask each one of you to have a chance to say concluding remarks to the audience who is with us. Thank you, audience. And Hernan, you want to go first since you're up on my screen?
Thank you, Sherry. No, I mean, it's certainly a pleasure collaborating on anything MIT. You got me there. You know, it's all the things that we learned at your class. I carry them by close to my heart, and you know, just trying to make a difference. And yeah, happy to share contact information. And you know, Latin America is certainly an up and coming emerging ecosystem, and we're very bullish on that. One other thing that Alan mentioned about, you know, how we're seeing kind of like a very nascent activity on south to south markets, right? I kind of like have this weird theory that something will probably happen first in Southeast Asia, then come over to LATAM via Brazil first, and then we'll spin out to Mexico, and then it will go over to MENA, and then maybe to Africa. But I think that there's a little bit of like arbitrage opportunities there, because we were really like looking how this, you know, these flows of startups happen, and you know, fascinating opportunities. And I think that these global south to south communities are bound to have like new unicorns, and maybe it's going to look like the sum of, I don't know, Shuttle in India plus Swivel in Egypt and Africa plus Urban in Mexico. I think it's something powerful brewing right now in emerging markets, and certainly very excited to be part of that.
Thank you. Thank
Hernan,
you.
it's not, sorry to interrupt, Sherry. It's not a weird theory. It's happening. It's going to keep happening. We're just early, right? So you look wrong for a long time when you're early in a trend, and then the graphs go like this, right? So it's I think it's very interesting to see.
Well, I was gonna ask. Well, you're sitting there, Ellen. Do you wanna say any concluding thoughts?
Oh, I didn't mean to disrupt the flow.
It's okay. You're there right now.
Hernan gave basically the speech we give for Endeavor. So it's always great to have our own mentors advocating. But look, we believe in role models, right? We believe in success stories. We totally believe it's what Moises said too about, you know, we're here to change the world. No, entrepreneurs are changing the world, right? We're here to help. And I think from wherever you sit and whatever you do, thinking about that, right? And thinking about how, whether you're a university professor or a corporate executive, an angel investor, right? How can you invest in some of the next generation visionaries? And I mean, invest your money or your time or your relationships or your network, right? To help enable them to drive the changes. That's the future we need to build together.
Great. Thank you. Bringing it home. All right, Alicia, the voice of the entrepreneur. You bring that one on home.
Yes, well, I'm really happy to be here. Like, honestly, listening to everyone, seeing how the ecosystem is growing, and how I genuinely think that I'm a product of everything that you guys are working on. You know, like this platform, this ecosystem has given me, I have friends in Argentina, in Peru, in Mexico, in Costa Rica, building startups. And this has been life-changing, because I did get comments like what Hernan said, like I did hear when I just graduated, why don't you just get a real job? You know, like I did get comments like that. I did feel uncertain at different moments. And it was the fact that I had a community and support. Like, I might not have had money at the beginning, but I did have like the mentality, those role models. I had people to look up to. And I think I do see it more and more in Latin America, whereas 5 years ago when I left to come to the US, it was very new. And now, like, I have so many friends in different parts that I can just call and ask questions, because ultimately for us, like including populations that are different in data sets, to optimize digital healthcare is key. So we need to be talking all over the world. You know, we can't be just limited to one, like to repeat the same mistakes of one size fits all. So like I loved being part and participating, and I think what you guys are creating, those opportunities, is exactly what we need and what we need to continue. And as entrepreneurs, like we need to apply and participate. You know, like ultimately they exist for a reason, and they're very valuable if you really take like, don't go for things just for the money. Go for the networks and that family that people are telling you, because it becomes stronger than you would even imagine. So
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much. Inspiring and concrete, just like the best entrepreneurs. Thank you. And okay, Moises, you bring it on home. Brazil.
Well, actually, entrepreneurial abilities is something that everybody has. Is not something that is unique to some people. And we see our role as to listen, to understand, and to kind of open up, be next to the entrepreneur, and let him be what he is. We don't believe that one guy could be entrepreneur for any kind of business. There is some business he could be and make a difference. So be next to him. That's what our main job. Be talking to entrepreneurs and assuring them they are able to move ahead. Give them courage. And in our world of corporate multi-corporate venture, we see the corporations ready to to invest in solutions they could not do themselves inside. So we see demand, and we see this entrepreneur capability. It's our role to listen, to understand, and to help them to have the courage to move ahead, to serve these opportunities.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that's it from my side on behalf of Lee Ullman and the fabulous MIT Sloan Latin America office, Jacqueline, and the rest of the team that has organized today's webinar. I want to say thank you to our other sponsors. Mostly, I want to say thank you to our panelists who have made a big generous gift of their time and their expertise and their insight and their networks to be with us today. It means a lot to me to be able to listen to experts with concrete insights, but also really positive takeaways. And this is a group of really thoughtful, big picture investors and entrepreneurs who don't just live in their very narrow swim lane, but who care deeply about larger, bigger issues and building out our ecosystems. And I like to think that that is an important difference that matters. And so let me put a spotlight on that and say thank you for the way you do your day job, but also for telling the rest of us about it. And it's time to go. My laptop tells me that it's 2 o'clock. I appreciate you for joining us. I wish you a great rest of today. Stay safe out there, and we're done.
Thank you, Shari. You were awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shari.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
All righty.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care. Take care.